Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so that you never miss any video lesson from Rao's IAS Study Circle. Join the official Telegram channel of Rao's IAS Study Circle to stay updated and get all the materials on the Telegram. The link to the channel can be found in the description box.
Now all of us understand the importance of optional subject in overall scheme of UPSC Civil Services examination. And if you're confused about which optional subject to choose, how to find the best teachers and academic support for your optional papers, and above all, how to prepare for the same during these difficult times, Rao's IAS has best solution for your optional subject related problems. We are conducting optional orientation sessions on 22nd and 29th of May 2021, in which you can learn from the Rao's IAS teachers about how to prepare for the optional subjects and how are we going to help you in scoring your best in the mains examination. The optional batches are starting from 4th of June 2021 via live online classes. Consider this as a call to all of those who wish to completely cover the optional subject by December 2021. This will ensure timely coverage of optional subject, and then you can focus your attention completely on prelims from January or February 2022 and keep revising the optional subject till you appear for the mains examination. Rao's IAS is offering guidance for political science, public administration, history, sociology, geography, economics and psychology from Delhi, Jaipur and Bangalore centers. In the description of the video, there is a link which you can use to register yourself for the orientation for the respective optional subject session. We at Rao's IAS are committed to give you the best guidance and academic support to excel in civil services examination. Join the orientation and kickstart your mains optional subject preparation from a team of best teachers in the arena. Let us now begin the discussion.
Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading from a UPSC examination perspective. Now today let us take up the New Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 17th May 2021. The news to be discussed has been displayed on your screen and timestamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. So on this note, let's start our today's discussion from our prelims and mains point of view. Now let's take up the first news appearing on page number 6 in the editorial section. It states, using all options, enabling other manufacturers to produce Covaxin is a necessary step. Now in this news analysis, you must know that India and South Africa together had earlier sought temporary waiver of patent protections on vaccines in public interest under the TRIPS agreement. However, this editorial highlights that the government of India so far has not made any efforts to bring vaccines or medicines under a statutory regime to allow for wider availability of vaccines in the present medical emergency circumstances and also diversity of options with respect to number of vaccines. Further, the editorial also highlights that even government submission in the Supreme Court runs contrary to its international position, whereby it's asking for temporary waiver of patent protection on vaccines under the TRIPS agreement. So in this regard, we need to know that whether this temporary waiver of patent protection is applicable or is allowed only under the TRIPS agreement or also under the Indian laws. And in this regard, we also need to know about a concept known as compulsory licensing, as has also been provided in this particular editorial. As you can see, this editorial says that the agreement, that is the TRIPS agreement, allows exceptions to the right of patent owners by grant of compulsory licenses. And Section 100 of the Indian Patents Act 1970 allows the center to license specific companies to manufacture the vaccines, while Section 92 of the same act, that is the Patents Act 1970, allows the center to issue compulsory license in circumstances of a national or extreme emergency. So in this regard, we need to know about patent protection, about the aspect or the concept of compulsory licensing, and also the aspect of compulsory licensing with respect to the TRIPS agreement, that is trade related aspects of intellectual property rights agreement. Now first and foremost, we need to understand that what does a patent grant? Now a patent grants exclusive right for an invention which may be of a product or a process. So a patent can be either of a product or of a process for 20 years. So if a company gets patent protection on any of its product or any of its process which manufactures the product, then that patent has been granted or is granted for 20 years. And this patent is granted for such inventions which are new, such invention which involves an inventive step which did not exist before. That is, if you are manufacturing, say, ABC, and you applied a particular process or an inventive step which did not exist earlier with respect to industrial applications, then this process or this step can also be given patent protection. Such thing which has not existed before, and such process or products which has industrial applications. So these are the grounds on which patent is granted. It further says that when patent is granted on a particular invention, it means that no other person can either produce or sell such invention for commercial purpose without the approval of the creator of such invention. So if this company ABC has manufactured, say, something, then no other organization or no other company can sell its product unless and until ABC company allows such other organization to sell its product which are patent protected. It further states that Government of India grants legal protection to various inventions through the Indian Patents Act 1970. Now, example taken here is that suppose if patent is granted to company ABC for one of its pharmaceutical product XYZ or any of the medicines which you can think of, then no other company can produce the same medicine without the due permission from ABC for 20 years. Now, understanding this through a simple example, suppose the company Cipla has created or manufactured a new drug or new medicine to treat malaria, and this medicine does not exist in the market. And in the process, Cipla gets a patent protection for its medicine to treat malaria. Now, after the patent protection on the drug, Cipla becomes the only company which can either manufacture or sell this particular drug. And no other company, for example, Ranbaxy, cannot sell this particular drug which has been patented by Cipla. So this is in general the meaning of patent protection. And patent protection in India is provided through the Indian Patents Act of 1970. Now, in order to understand about the aspect of compulsory licensing, it's important to know about the term of the patent as provided under Section 53 of Indian's Patent Act 1970. Now, this says that the patent, if it is granted for any invention for a product or process, is applicable for 20 years. Now, this compulsory license process, in a way, overrides this particular provision of Indian Patents Act. That is, it allows other companies or agencies, including government agencies, to manufacture such product in case of any national emergency or for the general public, or if it benefits the general public at large, that is in public interest. So keeping this aspect in mind, let's understand about compulsory licenses as provided under Section 84 of the Indian Patents Act 1970. Now, this provision states that at any time after the expiration of 3 years from the date of grant of a patent, any person interested may make an application to the controller for grant of compulsory license on a patent on any of the following grounds. So this provision provides for the grounds on which application for compulsory licenses can be made. These grounds are, first, that the reasonable requirements of the public with respect to the patented invention have not been satisfied. That is, that particular product which has been granted patent protection has not satisfied public interest. Second, that the patented invention is not available to the public at a reasonably affordable price. For example, treatment of any important disease. Third, that the patented invention is not worked in the territory of India. So based on these grounds, an application for compulsory license over a patented product or a process can be applied for. Now further, the provision under Indian Patents Act highlight that in considering the applications filed under this section, that is Section 84 for compulsory licensing, the controller shall take into account the following aspects. So while granting, that is, while considering the application for compulsory licensing, the controller under Indian Patents Act shall take into account the following points with respect to granting of compulsory license. These points are the nature of the invention, the time which has elapsed since the sealing of the patent, and the measures already taken by the patentee or any licensee to make full use of the invention. That is, whether full use of the invention has taken place or efforts have been made with respect to full use of the invention by the patentee or by any licensee. According to Indian Patents Act, patentee means the person whose name has been entered in the register as grantee or as proprietor of the patent or as owner of the patent. The next point which shall be taken into account by the controller is that the ability of the applicant to work the invention to public advantage. That is, whether the applicant who has made such an application for compulsory licensing can make use of the application for patent for public advantage. Third, the capacity of the applicant to undertake the risk in providing capital and working the invention if the applications were granted. That is, whether the applicant who is asking for compulsory licensing is willing to undertake the risk involved in the entire process with respect to providing capital and working for the invention. And lastly, the controller shall also consider whether the applicant has made efforts to obtain a license from the patentee on reasonable terms and conditions, and such efforts have not been successful within a reasonable period as the controller may deem fit. That is, whether the applicant has made an application to the owner of the patent or the patentee for grant of license. That is, to allow the particular person to manufacture the patented product. So these are the aspects which the controller shall take into account when an application for compulsory licenses has been applied under the Indian Patents Act 1970. Now, another important aspect highlighted in this editorial is regarding Section 92, which provides for special provision for compulsory licenses on notification by the central government. And these special provisions are with respect to national emergency, circumstances of extreme urgency, or in case of public non-commercial use. So in such cases of emergency, if the central government thinks that it is necessary to grant compulsory licenses, then it can do so. Further, it states that where the controller is satisfied on consideration of the application for compulsory license, that it is necessary either in circumstance of national emergency or in circumstance of extreme urgency or a case of public non-commercial use which may arise, including public health crisis relating to acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, human immunodeficiency virus, tuberculosis, malaria, or other epidemics, then the controller shall not apply any procedure which has been specified in one of the provisions of Indian Patents Act with respect to application for grant of compulsory licenses. So basically for these provisions, some of the procedure which has been provided under the Indian Patents Act for grant of compulsory license can be waived off by the controller. Now, so far we have seen the provisions of Indian Patent Act 1970 with respect to compulsory licensing. So in this regard, let's also go through the provisions with respect to TRIPS regarding the aspect of compulsory licensing. Now, the TRIPS agreement allows the use of compulsory licenses. It states that compulsory licensing enables a competent government authority to license the use of a patented invention to a third party or to any government agency without the consent of the patent holder. So from your examination perspective, you must know that compulsory licensing has been allowed under TRIPS. And Article 31 of the TRIPS agreement sets forth a number of conditions for the granting of compulsory licenses. Some of the conditions include a case-by-case determination of compulsory license application. That is, to grant or allow compulsory license under TRIPS, a case-to-case determination or case-by-case determination may be needed. Next, the need to demonstrate prior, that is unsuccessful negotiations with the patent owner for a voluntary license and the payment of adequate remuneration to the patent holder. Now, all these provisions have already been discussed under the Indian Patents Act. So, the Indian Patents Act can be said to be in compliance with the TRIPS agreement. Now, the TRIPS agreement further states that where compulsory licenses are granted to address a national emergency or other circumstances of extreme urgency, certain requirements or process can be waived off in order to hasten the process. It further states that although TRIPS agreement refers to some of the possible grounds such as emergency and anti-competitive practices for issuing compulsory license, however, it leaves the member nations full freedom, or it gives the member nations full freedom to stipulate or fix other grounds such as those related to non-working of patents, public health or public interest. Now, another important aspect from your prelims perspective is regarding the Doha Declaration. Now, the Doha Declaration states that each member under WTO has the right to grant compulsory licenses and the freedom to determine the grounds upon which such licenses are granted. Further, TRIPS also allows for compulsory licensing of drugs so that a generic version of the life-saving drugs can be produced for the general public at large, as it will also help to meet public health challenges as in present times. So, compulsory licenses under TRIPS effectively allows countries to overcome the restrictions imposed by patent holder and make the drugs available at lower price for the general public to meet certain health challenges. So overall, we understand that TRIPS allows for compulsory licensing based on case-to-case determination, based on the need to demonstrate prior or unsuccessful negotiations with the patent owner regarding either license or royalty, and the payment of adequate remuneration to the patent holder. Now, after going through the TRIPS agreement regarding compulsory licensing, we found that most of the provisions of TRIPS have been highlighted under the Indian Patents Act, and it is in this regard the Government of India provided an affidavit to the Supreme Court with respect to the steps which can be taken by the central government during national emergency or health crisis for compulsory license. So the central government stated that in India the patent regime is governed by the Patents Act 1970, under which section 92 of the Act envisages the grant of compulsory license in circumstances of national emergency and extreme emergency, which we have already seen. The Union government further stated in the Supreme Court that once a declaration of national emergency is made and the relevant patents notified, that is, those patent holders are notified, then any person interested in manufacturing the patented drug can make an application with respect to compulsory licensing to the Controller General of Patents, who can then issue a compulsory license to the applicant. It further states that the patentee would be paid a reasonable royalty as fixed by the Controller General of Patents. Further, Section 100 of the Patents Act allows the central government to authorize certain companies to use any patents for the purpose of the government. So, according to Section 100, the central government can authorize certain companies to use any patents for the purpose of the government. And Indian companies can begin manufacturing the drugs while negotiating the royalties with the patentees. Now, this aspect is very important as it was also highlighted in the TRIPS agreement, which is regarding negotiation of royalties with the patentees or the owner of the patent. It further says that if the central government or its authorized company is not able to reach an agreement with the patentee, that is owner of the patent, the High Court then in such situation can fix a reasonable royalty which is to be paid to the patentee. The government further stated that another alternative for the central government is to acquire the patent under Section 102 from the patentees. And additionally, the government also stated that under Section 66 of the Patents Act, the central government is also entitled to revoke a patent in public interest. Now, these are the submissions of the central government to the Supreme Court. However, for us from an examination perspective, we need to know the process which are involved with respect to granting compulsory licenses, especially in case of national emergency or in case of extreme urgency or in case of any health crisis. Thus, this editorial becomes important as questions in your prelims and mains can be asked with respect to compulsory license under the Indian Patents Act and also under TRIPS agreement. So, the aspect of compulsory licensing becomes important from the perspective of GS paper 3 in your mains examination, especially regarding issues relating to intellectual property rights. And questions can also be asked in the GS paper 2 section regarding the aspect of social justice and also governance with respect to laws, institutions and bodies constituted for protection and betterment of the vulnerable sections of the population and issues relating to the aspect of health. Now, after our discussion, you can consider this as your mains practice question. It states, what do you mean by compulsory license? When and under which circumstances can the Government of India allow for compulsory license? This question carries 15 marks and needs to be attempted within 250 words. So after this discussion, let's move to the next article. The next article to be discussed appears on page number 6. It says, it is getting from bad to worse for women workers. in the pandemic, women have borne a disproportionate burden of the severe disruptions to life and the economy. Now, this article is talking about the disproportionate burden on income, especially during the present health emergency going on in India. Now, overall, this article states that the labor force participation rate for women in India has declined, especially after the first lockdown last year. So, in this regard, this article highlights some of the important facts with respect to women losing income. It states that less number of women have returned to their work post the first lockdown imposed in 2020. It further says that only 19% of women were unaffected due to lockdown, as compared to 61% of men. That is, because of the lockdown, 61% of the men were unaffected with respect to their work. However, this percentage was mere 19% for women. It further states that nearly half of women, including salaried class, casual workers, self-employed people, withdrew from workforce as compared to 11% for men. That is, close to 50% of women withdrew from work. However, this percentage for men was only 11%. It further states that women mostly got daily wage employment as compared to self-employment. Now, why this becomes important? Because according to certain calculations, on an average, daily wage earner earns around rupees 7,965 per month, whereas the self-employed people earns around 12,955 rupees. So, we understand that if women are employed more in daily wage earnings, then they earn less income as compared to men, as more number of men were found to be self-employed, thereby earning more as compared to their female counterpart. It further highlights that women lost work more disproportionately irrespective of the sector or industry in which they worked. The news further states that with respect to lockdown, this led to more confinement of women to their home or to their households, and this also increased their household burden or household's work. And based on this, it can be said that married women and women from larger households were less likely to return to their work. So, overall, we can say that burden of unpaid work for women increased post lockdown. Now, regarding such women who were employed even during the lockdown, even for such women who remain employed, it came with an added burden of household responsibilities. So, for women who were employed, for them it was their employment along with the burden of household activity. And according to a survey done by India Working Survey 2020, it highlighted that number of hours spent by women on domestic work increased manifold. So basically, the women who were being employed even during lockdown, for them the number of hours spent on the household burden increased manifold. And this increased burden of work because of household responsibilities also remain an unpaid work for these women. So overall, the situation of women declined or deteriorated post lockdown. Now, apart from whatever has been provided in the article, you must also know the following aspects from your UPSC mains perspective, such as status of women's participation in workforce, trends in labor force participation rate, reasons for decline in female labor force participation rate, and effect of lockdown on women, especially with respect to their loss of jobs. So in this regard, let's go through these important points, especially from your mains perspective, as questions on a declining labor force participation rate for women can be asked in your upcoming prelims or mains examination. So let's go through the status of women's participation in workforce. Now in this regard, two reports have been highlighted here. First is the Global Gender Gap Report published by World Economic Forum, and the 2019 Oxfam report, which also highlights about the gender wage gap and the inequality present in any country. So, the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report 2021 ranks India at 140 out of 156 countries. And this ranking is in terms of women's economic participation and opportunity. Further, the Oxfam report says that women are paid far lower wages as compared to men. And this aspect is evident as per the 2019 Oxfam report, which highlighted that gender wage gap for India is highest in Asia. Now, another worrying aspect is the fact that majority of women are employed in the informal sector of the economy, where they do not have access to minimum wages or the social security benefits. For example, it states that in the agriculture sector, it employs close to 60% of women who work as agricultural laborers without any form of guaranteed minimum wages. So these are some of the problems faced by women, especially with respect to the income aspect. Now let's also go through some of the important observations with respect to the female labor force participation rate, especially that of 2017-18. So here it states that the labor force participation rate in 2017-18 was 75% for male and a mere 25.3% for female. And this female labor force participation rate in rural areas was higher as compared to urban areas. So, more women worked in the rural areas as compared to the urban areas. It further mentions about a decline in the total female labor force participation rate from 45.2% in 1993-94 to a mere 25.3% in 2017-18. So we see a rapid decline of female participation in the workforce from 45% in 1993-94 to a mere 25.3% in 2017-18. And this decline in the female labor force participation rate has been sharper in the rural areas as compared to the urban areas. So these are some of the important observations with respect to female labor force participation rate for the year 2017-18. Now regarding reasons for decline in female labor force participation rate, it mentions about two sides, supply side and demand side. Regarding supply side, it states that higher enrollment of females in higher educational institutions has been one of the reasons. More number of women opting for household duties due to increase in household incomes. And the third aspect is the cultural aspect or the cultural factor, which mentions about social constraints and patriarchal norms, which prohibits or does not allow women to work. Now regarding the demand side, it talks about structural transformation, as it mentions about the fact that decline in agriculture is not accompanied by creation of more jobs for women in other sectors. It also mentions about decline in labor intensive industries in urban areas and a significant wage gap between males and females. So these can be said to be the demand side factors of declining female labor force participation rate. So with respect to declining female labor force participation rate, this news highlights that laws in India must address the issues of women and laws must be made gender sensitive. And in this regard, it highlights that there is a need for proper implementation of labor laws recently passed by Parliament, as it will help in boosting employment. However, there is also a need to include provisions in order to reduce gender wage gap and also improve the conditions of work for women. For example, the labor codes allow women to work in the night shifts. However, it does not place much emphasis on ensuring their safety at workforce during night or fixing the responsibility on the management. So these aspects needs to be taken care of by the central government, and the labor laws must be made gender sensitive. It further says that there is a need to incorporate gender sensitive policies and rules in our labor codes to improve conditions of work for women and also to reduce the gender wage gap and boost female participation in the workforce. Further, this article also talks about certain other measures which needs to be taken to improve participation of women in the workforce. It mentions about expansion of MG Narega to provide more employment opportunities for women. Similarly, there is also a need to introduce the Urban Employment Guarantee Program on the likes of MG Narega, which as of now is for rural area. So both these employment guarantee program in the urban and rural area will cumulatively help to improve female participation in the workforce. It further says that there is a need to systematically address the demand and supply side constraints which we just discussed to improve female labor force participation rate. And there's also need for adequate investment in social infrastructure, such as in the areas of health, in the areas of education, housing, childcare, elderly care, etc., as these will also boost employment for women. It further says that there is also a need for a coordinated efforts by the states to facilitate employment for women. So state governments must also come forward and make coordinated policies in order to provide employment to women. And apart from providing employment to women, the state government must also address the immediate needs of women through setting up of community kitchen, prioritizing the opening of schools and Anganwadi centers, engagement with the self-help groups for the production of personal protective equipment kits. So these steps cumulatively can improve female participation in the workforce. Now this article also mentions about providing certain allowances, say for example of rupees 5,000 per month for the next 6 months for 2.5 million accredited social health activists or ASHA workers and Anganwadi workers, as most of these workers are women. Thus, these steps will boost more participation of women in the workforce. Now, this article also mentions about a national employment policy which currently is being looked into by the government. It says that the national employment policy should systematically address the constraints around the participation of women workforce, both regarding the availability of work and regarding household responsibilities. Further, the article also mentions about the fact that the government needs to come up with a universal basic services program. Now, the idea behind this program is to fill existing vacancies in the social sector and also expand public investment in the areas of health, education, child and elderly care. So, this article concludes by stating that all these steps cumulatively will help to bring women into the workforce, not only by directly creating employment opportunities for them, but also by alleviating some of their domestic work burdens while also overcoming nutritional and educational deficits. So the idea is not only to provide them employment, but also to take care of their nutritional and educational deficits. Thus, these are some of the measures which has been suggested in this article which should be taken to improve female labor force participation rate in India. Now, based on our discussion, this becomes your mains practice question. As it states, highlight the possible reasons for decline in female labor force participation rate in India along with measures needed to improve labor force participation rate for females. This question carries 15 marks and needs to be addressed in 250 words. So, this article to improve female labor force participation rate can be covered under GS paper 3 and also GS paper 2 in the mains examination. Under GS paper 3, it gets covered under Indian economy and issues relating to aspects of development and employment. And in GS paper 2, under the aspect of governance, especially with respect to welfare schemes for the vulnerable sections of the population, laws and institutions and bodies constituted for the protection and betterment of these vulnerable sections, and issues relating to development and management of the social sector services relating to health, education and human resources. And from your prelims perspective, this topic gets covered under the aspect of public policy, rights issues, economic and social development along with sustainable development and also social sector initiatives. So after discussing this particular article, let's take up our next article. The next news to be taken up appears as a lead article on page number 6. It says, the road from Ladakh is paved with disruptions. China-India ties are moving into a zone of problems even as New Delhi grapples with pandemic-related issues. So this article highlights that disengagement which was promised between India and China is actually not taking place. And despite agreements on disengagement, China is not cooperating with India as much as it should have. So in this regard, this article states that disengagement with China after Galwan clash initiated. However, disengagement as promised has not taken shape so far. The PLA troops of China still deny Indians the territories which it earlier patrolled. And in this regard, government's aim of restoring status quo ante as of April 2020 still remains unfulfilled. Another important aspect highlighted in this article is that India has not taken control of the dominating peaks like Black Top. Now regarding the map, this is the peak of black top between India and China. And this peak of black top is close to finger 4 and finger 8. And this peak of black top is also close to helmet top and Gurung Hill. Now regarding the terms of disengagement, both the countries agreed on a 5-point course of action to disengage and reduce tensions along the line of actual control. These 5-point course of actions were: first, not allowing differences to become disputes; second, continuing their dialogue; quickly disengagement, maintain proper distance and ease of tensions; third, abiding by the existing India-China border protocols and avoiding escalatory action; fourth, to continue to have dialogue and communication through the special representative mechanism on the India-China boundary question; and to initiate or enhance confidence building measures to maintain and enhance peace and tranquility in the border areas between India and China. Now, because of this 5-point course of action agreed between China and India, China withdrew their troops from the north and south banks of Pangong Tsaw Lake. Now, if you can see in this map, this is the Pangong Tsaw Lake. So, as per the disengagement agreement, Chinese withdrew their troops from the north and south banks of Pangong Tsaw Lake. Now, this is the Pangong Tsaw Lake, and if I zoom out, then you see that it is very close to the India-China border along the LAC. Now, in this regard, the article states that disengagement at Pangong Tsaw was a small step. However, standoff between Chinese troops and Indian troops still persist at different places such as Depsang Plains, Demchok and Gogra Hot Springs region. Now, these areas are the Depsang Plains, and if I zoom out, you can see that this is the northeastern side of Ladakh region. Similarly, this area is the Demchok region, and if I zoom out, then you find out that it is very close to the India-Chinese border. So the article says that despite these disengagement agreements, standoff still persist at these different areas along the border or along the LAC. Now, as a part of this disengagement process or disengagement agreement, buffer zones were created. But most of these buffer zones have been created on the Indian side of LAC. Now, this effectively has converted Indian territory into a neutral zone. Further, India is also concerned with Chinese activity in the eastern region, namely in Sikkim and Arunachal Pradesh. Now, the article states that creating buffer zones is more of a temporary process. So, in this regard, the article highlights that mutual delineation of LAC is the only long-term solution to the border dispute between India and China. However, issues between India and China are much beyond only border disputes. So, there are other areas as well where India and China are involved apart from their border aspects or apart from their border clashes. Now, regarding the disengagement at Pangong Tsaw Lake, this article says that even on the north bank of Pangong Tsaw Lake, a new status quo has been created where patrolling rights are yet to be restored by the Indian troops. Further, Kailash Range has also witnessed neither de-escalation nor de-induction. So these are some of the aspects which the article has highlighted. So overall, this article suggests that disengagement has not taken place properly, and the issues of India and China goes much beyond their border disputes. So regarding these other areas, this news says that China actively is encroaching on India's sphere of influence in South Asia and Indian Ocean region. Further, China is also blocking India's ambitions for its permanent membership at the United Nations Security Council and also India's entry into the nuclear suppliers group. Further, Chinese state-sponsored hackers are also attacking India's critical infrastructure. A recent example can be said to be the cyber attacks in Maharashtra, where the cyber attack took place on Maharashtra's power grid. Huge trade deficit between India and China. Now, another aspect of concern is regarding vaccine Maitri. Now, Government of India, through its vaccine Maitri policy, had able to overtake China in terms of influence in South Asian region, in the Indian Ocean island nations, and also in the African continent by distributing vaccines to these areas. However, Government of India failed to continue this vaccine policy due to vaccine shortage in India during the second wave. And here, China has filled the void or the gap and has supplied vaccines to Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Pakistan. So, these are some of the other areas of concerns between India and China. So, in order to counter China, India has enhanced its engagement with Quad countries. Now, the Quad countries are US, India, Australia, and Japan. So, these initiatives include Quad Joint Vaccine Initiative between India, US, Japan, and Australia, as these countries decided to build a first of its kind joint vaccine supply chain to address the current and any future pandemic situations in the Indo-Pacific region. Now, the Quad members also discussed concerns relating to cyber attacks. It says that line of actual control and concerns regarding Chinese cyber attacks were also discussed in the Quad Leadership Summit. Further, the Quad members also discussed about the Supply Chain Resilience Initiative. Now, this becomes important because the present health crisis in India has threatened India's supply chains. So, India along with Japan and Australia have launched Supply Chain Resilience Initiative recently. However, the article concludes by saying that Quad is not a panacea to contain China. So, in order to resolve the border disputes with China, India should bilaterally resolve the disputes with China to have peace at border and also to ensure economic growth. Now, this topic of India-China border dispute becomes important from the perspective of GS Paper 2 and also GS Paper 3 in your mains examination. Under GS Paper 2, it gets covered under India and its neighborhood relations and also bilateral, regional and global groupings and agreements involving India or affecting India's interest. Whereas under GS Paper 3, this topic also gets covered under challenges to internal security through communication networks, role of media and social networking sites in internal security challenges, basics of cyber security, and also security challenges and their management in border areas, linkages of organized crime with terrorism. Whereas in the prelims examination, this topic gets covered under current events of international importance and also with respect to Indian geography, especially the aspect related to maps. So with this discussion, let's move to the next article. The next news to be taken up appears on page number 7 as an article. It says, Restructuring the Tribunal System. It is time to set up a National Tribunals Commission. Now, this article is with respect to this particular ordinance which has been promulgated by the President of India under Article 123 of the Indian Constitution. And this ordinance is about the Tribunals Reforms, Rationalization and Conditions of Service Ordinance 2021. Now, this 2021 ordinance has replaced the appellate tribunals under various legislations by either High Court or by central government or by other agencies or authorities. So, in this regard, this article highlights that it is time to set up the National Tribunals Commission through a constitutional amendment. So, this particular ordinance states that an ordinance further to amend the Cinematograph Act 1952, the Customs Act 1962, Airports Authority of India Act 1994, the Trademarks Act 1999, Protection of Plant Varieties and Farmers' Rights Act 2001 and other acts also. Now, since this particular ordinance has replaced the appellate tribunals, hence this particular ordinance has been challenged in the Supreme Court of India. So based on this understanding with respect to this article, let us understand that why this article suggests that it's necessary to establish a National Tribunals Commission. Now, as already stated, the 2021 ordinance has made amendment to these various legislations, and all these legislations provide for an appellate tribunal or an appellate board. So this 2021 ordinance has replaced these tribunals or appellate board with respect to High Court. So under the Cinematograph Act 1952, earlier there was an appellate tribunal. Now after the ordinance, the power of this appellate tribunal has been transferred to the High Court. Similarly, for Trademarks Act, the powers of appellate board has been transferred to High Court. Under Copyrights Act, appellate board has been transferred to Commercial Court or the commercial divisions of a High Court. With respect to Customs Act, it was the authority for advance rulings, but now the jurisdiction has been transferred to High Court. Now for Patents Act 1970, there was an appellate board and now the jurisdiction has been transferred to High Court. Now regarding the Airports Authority of India Act 1994, there was an Airport Appellate Tribunal. But now its power has been transferred to the central government for disputes arising from disposal of properties left on airport premises by unauthorized occupants and to High Courts for appeals against orders of an eviction officer. Further, regarding the control of National Highways Land and Traffic Act 2002, earlier the appellate body was the Airport Appellate Tribunal, and its power has been transferred to Civil Court. And for the Geographical Indication of Goods Registration and Protection Act 1999, the powers of Appellate Board has been transferred to the High Court. So this is what the Ordinance of 2021 has done. Now, after the ordinance was passed, it was met with various criticisms. The first and foremost was bypassing the legislative process to avoid discussion in Parliament. The next criticism was that, despite Supreme Court's direction in Roger Matthew versus South Indian Bank case of 2019, no judicial impact assessment was conducted prior to abolishing the tribunals through this ordinance. And the article also states that this ordinance is also against Madras Bar Association versus Union of India judgment, which fixed the tenure of chairpersons of tribunals. So these are some of the criticisms with respect to the 2021 ordinance, which has transferred the powers of some of the ordinance under these various legislations to High Court or respective authorities. Now, it is in this backdrop that this article proposes to set up a National Tribunal Commission through a constitutional amendment. And in this regard, this article states that this commission will be an independent umbrella body to supervise the functioning of tribunals, appointment of members, to oversee disciplinary proceedings against members, and also to take care of administrative and infrastructural needs of the tribunals. Further, the article says that this idea of establishing a National Tribunal Commission was first mooted in L. Chandra Kumar versus Union of India judgment of 1997, but so far this has not seen the light of the day. So the question which becomes important is that why National Tribunal Commission needs to be established. So this article states that in India, executive interference in the functioning of tribunals is often seen in matters of appointment and removal of tribunal members. And it is often seen that in most of the tribunals, there is hardly any judicial member. And most of these tribunals are filled with administrative officers. So ultimately, they function as per the directive from the ministry. So it is in this backdrop this article mentions about executive interference not only with respect to appointment and removal of tribunal members, but also with respect to provision of finances, infrastructure, personnel, and other resources required for day-to-day functioning or administration of the tribunals. So this article states that because of this interference from the executive, the National Tribunals Commission must be established through a constitutional amendment. So this becomes an important highlight of this article, that it suggests to create a National Tribunals Commission through a constitutional amendment or be backed by a statute, that is through a legislation or a law that guarantees its functional, operational or financial independence. So it talks about either establishing a National Tribunals Commission through a constitutional amendment, that is making the NTC a constitutional body, or giving it a statutory recognition by providing its provision under a legislation. It further states the establishment of NTC will provide an authority to support uniform administration across all tribunals. So establishing a National Tribunal Commission will ensure uniformity in the administration process, and also with respect to selection of members and also removal of members of tribunals in a uniform manner. It further highlights that NTC could therefore pave the way for separation of administrative and judicial functions carried out by various tribunals. Now this becomes another very important point with respect to the National Tribunals Commission, that is to separate the administrative and judicial functions. And it is in this regard, this article has suggested a corporatized structure for National Tribunal Commissions with a board, a CEO and a secretariat, as this corporate structure having a board, a CEO and a secretariat will allow these tribunals to scale up its services and provide requisite administrative support to all tribunals across India. So this is why this article suggests that a National Tribunals Commission needs to be established either through a constitutional amendment or by backing of a legislation. Now, once this idea is established that National Tribunals Commission is necessary, the other question which arises is that what can be the duties of this particular commission? So here the article states that the NTC would ideally take up some duties relating to the administration and oversight of the tribunals, and it could also set performance standards for the efficiency of tribunals and their own administrative processes. So this aspect of establishing a performance standards become important. It further says that NTC can also function as an independent recruitment body to develop and operationalize the procedure for disciplinary proceedings and appointments of tribunal members. It further says that giving the NTC the authority to set members' salaries, allowances, and other service conditions would also help to maintain tribunals' independence. So, here it is also talking about tribunals' financial independence, so that the members do not have to depend on the executive, especially with respect to the financial needs of the institution and its members. It further says that administrative roles of the NTC includes providing support services to tribunal members, litigants, and their lawyers. And for this purpose, it would need to be able to hire and supervise administrative staff and also to consolidate, improve, and modernize tribunals' infrastructure. So, for all these aspects, both financial and administrative independence for this tribunal commission would be necessary. So, these can be said to be some of the duties which can be taken up by the National Tribunals Commission. So, as a way forward, we can say that until the NTC is constituted, Ministry of Finance should come up with a transitional plan for existing tribunals. The way to reform the tribunal system is to look at solutions for a systemic perspective supported by evidence. And establishing the National Tribunals Commission will definitely entail a radical restructuring of the present tribunal system. So, this can be said to be a way forward with respect to this particular article. Now, based on this discussion, this becomes your practice question for your mains. It says, suggest measures to homogenize the functioning, recruitment, and oversight abilities of tribunals in India. This question carries 10 marks and needs to be answered in 150 words. Now, this topic becomes important primarily from the perspective of governance and constitution with respect to GS paper 2. And in the prelims examination, questions can be asked with respect to Indian polity and governance and constitution. So, with this discussion, let's take up the question for the day. Now, based on our discussion, this becomes your practice question for the day. It says, consider the following statements. First, Supply Chain Resilience Initiative was launched by ASEAN. Second, this initiative helps in avoiding disruption of supplies due to natural calamities or pandemics. The question is, which of the statements given above are correct? Options are A, 1 only, B, 2 only, C, both 1 and 2, and D, neither 1 nor 2. Now, coming to the answer of yesterday, assertion was Bay of Bengal receives more cyclones than the Arabian Sea. Yes, this is correct. Reason, Arabian Sea is cooled more by ocean currents compared to Bay of Bengal. No, this reason is incorrect. Rather, the reason is with respect to more heating of the Bay of Bengal. So here the correct answer becomes C. That is, A is true and R is false. So with this, we come to an end to today's discussion. Thank you for watching DNS.